Okay, in real time, what just happened is Stick ended up reading further into the story and found out that Return to the Pit's canon ending is 1-to-1 with the Into the Pit book from Fazbear Frights. With that being said, then asked the question of which is the most likely to be canon. I still think the Return to the Pit is objectively canon. It's part of a canon series, and if it's going to regurgitate the same exact ending that we got from Fazbear Frights, I would say this is pretty good evidence of at this point, you have to choose whether or not you believe in Stitchline, which is the belief that Into the Pit and the other Stitch with Stingers take place inside of the game's timeline, the belief of Frightsgames, that all of those novels happen to take place inside of the game's timeline, or, like me, FrightsReboot, which is essentially the belief that these stories are being changed so that way they fit perfectly into continuity. As it currently stands, Into the Pit didn't really contain any continuity errors, excluding the quote-unquote sixth kid, which a lot of people took as, oh, well, this can't be canon because we know there's only 5 kids that ended up dying. However, as a lot of people always seem to forget, is that this was always an agony memory. That 6th kid was never intended to be part of the missing children's incident. They were always some separate kid that was just associated with them and not considered one of the missing children. With this, we now have the canon ending, so that means that Into the Pit story from Fazbear Frights is an in-continuity story. I know there's going to be people that sit there and argue that, well, the visual novels aren't really canon, but I'm not going to sit here and play that game with you. If we've already been told that this is, unlike Fazbear Frights, which is the only series to have ever said to do that, which, again, is a weird play on words, so it's very likely that's not what Scott meant. Nothing has insinuated that the books within the visual novel series that we've been getting are uncanon. People have been trying to find continuity errors, but there have been none. As it currently stands, this book, Return to the Pit, shows the definitively in-continuity version of the Into the Pit story. Does this mean what here exactly? I think this potentially means that Andrew was never intended to be considered one of the MCI kids. I think Andrew's fate has always been determined to be something related to it, but not exactly the same, and a lot of people took the 6th child that existed in the original story and existed in the game story and interpreted it as, oh, they've retconned a 6th kid in here, when in reality it was always intended to be as this hidden 6th victim, the new victim, the one that's not related to the MCI, but it has some sort of connection to them, because he doesn't have a suit to be buried inside of. That was always the point of his character. That's what we're told in the Into the Pit game, distinctly, that we're not trapped. It's up to us, either move on or fall into the pit, which is exactly where a lot of us believe that Andrew's body is actually located, that is where William either stuffed him or that he died while trying to escape from William by getting caught inside of the net. But it's nice to finally have confirmation that the Into the Pit story now has only 5 kids show up there, and that is the in-continuity version of the story. There are only 5 kids lined along that wall. Andrew is still most likely in continuity. I won't sit here and argue, because you can, if this is what it requires for you guys to accept these stories as canon, I'm not going to sit here and argue that maybe Andrew doesn't exist. You guys can interpret this as the definitively in-continuity version, like everyone else, and say, well, there's only 5 kids here, so Andrew doesn't exist anymore. But I personally believe that Andrew just isn't lined along that wall because his purpose is not being a retconned MCI kid. His purpose is much more greater than that, and he has a different purpose in that his fate is different from the MCI kids. But again, that's completely up to you guys, but I think for the first time, we now have a version of a Fazbear Fright story that everyone can agree is in continuity. A lot of people at this point are still going to try and argue it's not, but at that point, why? Why not say Return to the Pit is an in-continuity story? Genuinely, what part of the story makes it not work in continuity, other than people's argument of things being weird? Well, I don't want time travel inside of the series. It's not time travel. So again, what genuine reasoning is there to assume that this novel isn't in continuity? Because technically, you could say that just this novel is in continuity, that the other Fazbear Frights novels aren't, but at the end of the day, this now gives us a good direction to say that, hey, there's a good chance that these stories do take place in continuity, just in some weird way. I think at the very least, this kind of debunks Frights fiction, which is what a lot of people liked to believe at the time. But other than that, I really don't see any reason why a theorist wouldn't accept Return to the Pit as the in-continuity version of the story. The only weird thing that it contains is having 5 kids instead of 6 kids, but as I've stated before, Andrew's position has just been moved. He's not intended to be just another MCI victim. But you know, that's up for you guys to argue about. As it currently stands, it looks like my timeline is entirely accurate. There have been a few other pieces of information from people reading the stories that have been revealed, such as weird stuff about potentially the last victim not being Cassidy, as the last child that the yellow thing brings into the room, the 5th child, is actually a male, and as a lot of people assume, Cassidy is a female. However, of course, that's not confirmed. If she is actually a he, then that might add more things to, well, maybe she's the one you should not have killed because she's actually a he, and that's why they're referred to as boy pronouns. But that's up for debate. I don't personally think that's the case, because in other parts of the book, we're distinctly shown what seems to be the MCI, in which Cassidy is shown to be in the middle, or at the very least a girl with pigtails, and according to the versions of Cassidy we've seen, most notably that in the logbook, she does have pigtails, and that's the only girl inside of the MCI that could potentially have pigtails, considering that Susie doesn't have pigtails. Well, excluding the movie, inside of the game she doesn't have pigtails, so as it currently stands, I just don't think that the kid that was being dragged in there was Cassidy, and that is the only real argument that's still going on right now. There are multiple timelines that we have not yet uncovered, however they could end up giving us a lot more information going forward, but I'm glad to say that this book seems to fit perfectly fine in continuity for basically everybody, and can be theorized about whether or not it suggests Frightsgames, or whether or not it suggests that Cassidy was the one you should not have killed. This is a really beneficial book, I think, because it is now the one version of Into the Pit that can fit within all continuities, and I think that this should be the end of at least Into the Pit being in continuity debate being over, but we still don't know about everything else, so we'll end up seeing where that all goes, especially in Secret of the Mimic, which has the opportunity to add a bunch of information that we didn't previously know about. Unfortunately, Return to the Pit is the 3rd novel of the novel series, and the 4th one, Escape the Pizzaplex, is going to be the very last novel that's part of this series. It is possible that maybe, if because of how popular these books have been, Scott will consider making more down the road underneath a different title, but as it currently stands, we only have one more book left and a few more details within the book we're currently reading left to uncover, and then the visual novel series will be over, which is unfortunate because a lot of people were looking forward to there potentially being one about the DCI and about Fazbear Frights and all that stuff, but unfortunately it doesn't seem that we're going to be getting them. I'm actually really happy with how Return to the Pit has ended, and to be honest, we kind of all expected it to be this way, because, you know, we needed a canon ending, and that's the ending most people thought was canon anyway. So, it just being reiterated that, yeah, the Fazbear Frights ending is the one that's canon, just with the question of how many children there are, it's pretty nice. And until next time, I'll show back up to give you guys more information about what's left in the live read when we get through the rest of the book. Matane.